So this video is basically about New York. I lived in New York for a year with the interest in learning as much as I could about finance. And I was also interested in other venues. I was very interested in weightlifting at the time. So I kind of I worked out in a gym that's called Richie's Gym that had some of the strongest men I've ever seen in my life. Like they literally would lift 4-5 plates on each side of a bench press, 45-pound press plates. And I was also interested in the art industry. And I ended up, this is a great place for art and entertainment and fashion. So, I mean, especially Hell's Kitchen in Chelsea, and then Lower East Side, close to Chinatown, have quite a lot of art galleries and art venues. And if you go out on a if you leave your house and you go out on a Monday morning, you can probably find something open in most of your interests, usually for free, but sometimes you have to pay. It is not true that the only way to appreciate New York is with the money. I was there mostly broke all my time, and I ended up doing a lot of things. That being said, in order to be able to relate to the establishment of New York, you'll have to have money, and you also have to have status. I think it would be unrealistic to be able to relate to them without either of those two, money and status. I also developed, besides my interest in banking and finance, I ended up learning a lot about Bitcoin because there was the first little spike that happened. As I mentioned before, I learned quite a lot about weightlifting. I learned quite a lot about entertainment. Those are like the three fields that I was interested in. At this point, I cannot think of anything else that I was specifically interested in New York. Oh yes, I was interested in alternative relationships. And unfortunately, I ended up I didn't date anybody at the time, but I went to a lot of venues that had to do with alternative relationships, just to understand a little bit more how this developed. So right now I'm going to show you more or less a good diagram of New York. So New York is basically I remembered the other thing I did a lot is I played a lot of basketball. So I improved my basketball style. Queens. So here's Brooklyn. Here's Queens. Here's Bronx. Here's Harlem. And I forgot if these two are connected. I don't think they are. So this is Manhattan. And here's Staten Island. And I believe that the Statue of Liberty is here. So here were the two towers. Here were the two World Trade Centers, and in this side you have New Jersey, and in this side over here you have Connecticut. So New York expands. New York is actually a relatively big state. And it's very diverse. Most people tend to think that New York is just a city, but New York State is actually one of the largest in the East Side, and it has it expands all the way to Canada, and it has Buffalo, which is relatively different than New York. It has like Syracuse and Cornell University, which is in Ithaca, like the Greek place. And I've been in this part of New York during the fall, and it's actually very beautiful. Monticello is like a very beautiful place to see. One of the best places in the world to see the fall. I haven't experienced a lot of the fall in Europe, but I really liked it there when I saw it. It was very exciting to be in New York right before I was about to move to the States. Just checking out universities, and I had like all these expectations of what my life was gonna be, and I met all these people that were like friends that I made in Costa Rica, and it just ended up a lot more. My experience in New York ended up being a lot, in the States in general, as I mentioned in some videos, ended up being a lot more horrible than what I anticipated, and I just could never have imagined after I did this trip to New York. So, I mean, obviously New York, like England, where I am right now, has a class system. So the people who live in Manhattan are like the top predators in many ways. And they make the largest salaries, like $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 if you're working the right industry, $1 million if you work in the right industry. And they have a saying for the people who commute from New Jersey or from Brooklyn or from Queens. They called them bridge and tunnel. And this is a derogative term for people who commute from other sides into here. So New Jersey and, for example, Bronx are known for having a lot of minorities. And when I say minorities, it's basically like African American or Hispanic, but there are other minorities. I mean, obviously, there's all those groups that have moved to New York that have been depicted in a lot of movies, like The Irish. Like, I don't know if you've seen The Gangs of New York. Like, New York has a lot of Italians. And there was that famous purchase made where Manhattan was bought for almost nothing. I forgot it, but I think to the Dutch, I want to say, but I'm not entirely sure. Historically, New York also became part of the capital of the United States for a certain amount of time, but then it was moved. I believe that first it was in Philadelphia, then it was New York, and then it was moved down to Washington, D.C. And I believe that James Madison was, no, not James Madison, there was somebody else. Forgot his name. There was somebody who had ties to New York to try to move the capital here. I'm going to remember about this soon. So then basically we have New Jersey in this side. We have Brooklyn in this side. Queens, Staten Island, Statue of Liberty, and then the two towers. And then Manhattan's quite interesting because you basically have the Central Park here, which is like a huge park. Then here you have the Financial District, Feedy. Here you have Bowling Green, that really comes from England, as I learned very recently here in Brighton Hove. And then here you have Wall Street. So for me, a huge excitement about New York was to live in Wall Street. I always have had an interest in, I've had an interest, as I've seen my videos in several topics, but just being in a place where finance is the best, is one of the best places. It's one of the most relevant places as far as finance in the world, or the most, was very exciting. Even though I cannot speak really highly about, I cannot say that a lot of the people who work in finance are the friendliest people, but it was interesting to learn about it. So Wall Street, here's the New York Stock Exchange. I actually have an interview where I actually had an interview in Wall Street, and I also had an interview in the Big Apple. And it was really funny to have the interview in the Big Apple, because I remember when I had the interview in the Big Apple, this was after 10 to 15 years in the United States pursuing the American dream. And I remember being in that interview after all my time and all my training, all my investments. And basically I was like competing against a guy who just moved in from another country. He really did not have a master's degree or education, and he probably had more leverage than I had because of age. So it was just kind of like funny how it worked, and how easily connived I was by thinking that, like, oh, if I stay here, I will eventually get it. So I had like an interview in the Big Apple. This was what it was. All that being said, it was kind of exciting to have interviews in all these places. So really, here's Broadway, and this part has a bunch of buildings, the financial district. Then there's not a lot of big buildings. There's not a huge skyline for a while. Through Chinatown, here's Chinatown, Lower East Side. This is there's another name, the Greenwich Village, which used to be a place full of hippies, and now it changed because it just became priced out. So a lot of the hippies basically moved to, a lot of the alternative artists moved to Brooklyn, and now they moved somewhere else. Like they've been priced out of all those places. They moved to Bronx, or they moved to I don't know, Queens. So and then there's Midtown, has a bunch of buildings. Midtown is really like what you think when you think about New York, because Midtown has the Empire State Building and has the Chrysler Tower, which is